Please rise. Under the proper salute, repeat after me. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Move the agenda, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you so much. We do have a special presentation today, retirement of CPD K-9 Gunther by Councilman Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes.
And later this afternoon, council will consider a resolution to retire K-9 Gunther. So to give a little bit of context to this proclamation and our resolution, I'm going to ask Lieutenant, I knew I'd get it, Lieutenant Sean O'Brien, if he would just come and just say a few words about Gunther and y'all's relationship over the past 3 years.
All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you, council. K-9 Gunther, or as we call him, K-9 Gunny, and I got partnered just about 3 years ago. He was imported from a kennel in Hungary, and a company in Alabama called Vaporwake trained him and specialized what we call person-borne detection for firearms and explosives. So we've served together almost 3 years. In those 3 years, we've helped to recover 150 firearms, over 5,000 rounds of ammunition, over 150 shell casings, and assisted the bomb squad in recovering 6 live devices. So he's been a tremendous partner and asset for the community. And then earlier this year, he had a cancerous tumor removed. It seems to be, everything seems to be fine at the moment, but of course, there would be significant costs in getting him retrained since I got promoted. And so, hence we asked to just go ahead and retire him and let me take him home. I don't think he'll mind. So you'll still see him down on the riverfront because my wife and I live downtown. So, but that's a little snippet of his career with us. So.
Yeah.
Let's give K-9 Gunther and Sergeant O'Brien a big round of applause. With this dog.
Well, thank you.
We hate to see him go, but Sean O'Brien. And whereas Gunther's handler and officer, Lieutenant Sean O'Brien, understands the responsibility of Gunther's retirement, and whereas Gunther's handler and officer, Lieutenant Sean O'Brien, will keep K-9 Gunther and is willing to accept all responsibilities for Gunther's future care, such as medical, food, and housing. And whereas the city of Chattanooga is grateful to K-9 Gunther and his handler, Lieutenant O'Brien, for their service to the Chattanooga community for the past 3 years, as their service and commitment have undoubtedly had a positive and long-lasting impact on the safety and well-being of our great city. Now therefore be it resolved that the City Council and the City of Chattanooga and the Mayor of the City of Chattanooga, Tim Kelly, do hereby authorize the retirement of K-9 Gunther as a service dog. And we do appreciate your service and the service of Gunther. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Right, thank you so much, Councilman Henderson. Can I get approval on the minutes? All right, minutes stand without objection. All right, council, we moved into discussion of agenda. If you would take a look at tonight's agenda, ordinances under final reading, we have economic development. Please hit your light if you have any comments or questions. Ordinances under first reading, we have legal and wastewater. All right. Under resolutions, we have economic development, legal, parks and outdoors, we have planning and public works, as well as wastewater resolutions. All right, and again, hit your light if you have any comments or questions. All right, council, if you will take a look at next week's proposed agenda items, and if you have any comments or questions, please hit your light, and I'll give you a moment for that. All right, council, we have one purchase this evening. If you have any comments or questions, please hit your light. All right, and then we have future considerations. Please take a look at that. If you have any comments or questions, please hit your light. Okay, and I have a question about, under economic development, item B. We did receive a list of organizations, one of those organizations being Chet Foundation, which received a bulk of the funds, for renovations. Could someone come and explain what those renovations will consist of? Given I just wrote down 11th Street and, I want to know how is that going to improve that area with all these funds?
Yes, ma'am. So these are going to be for new restroom facilities inside of their day center there, that they've had in the past that are just, have been used up and outdated now, and they need to replace them.
Okay, so it's $700,000 for restrooms,
It's bathrooms and showers.
bathrooms and showers?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I may circle back to that one, but thank you so much, Richard,
Okay.
I appreciate it. All right, and I believe we have a brief attorney-client privilege this evening. All right, all right. That covers, any other questions about future considerations? Okay, we do have a committee today. We have planning and zoning. So if there are no other questions about our agenda this evening, I will turn it over to Councilman Ledford. I'm sorry about that. Okay, Councilwoman Burke.
Yeah,
Burks.
on next week,
Yes,
I request some time, wherever you find it best,
okay,
to revisit and discuss the Shallowford Road project,
okay,
and you tell me when and how you want to do that.
okay. Yes, ma'am. I will have that for you this evening.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, any other comments or questions? All right, now I'll turn it over to Councilman Ledford.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our planning and zoning meeting for December 5th. I will take a motion on the minutes. All right, minutes will stand without objection. Ms. Rennick, good afternoon. We do have a few items to cover today, including a special presentation with Mr. Anderson, which I believe we will have some comments and discussion also when we move towards the end of our committee meeting. We do have a special exceptions permit that's reading first. Phil, you want to cover that real quick for us?
Sure. This is a resolution involving a special exceptions permit for an existing liquor store here that will be located at 1008 Macaulay Avenue. And I guess you need to do some type of presentation on that request or not.
I do have a few slides, if that's appropriate, and that just has the highlights. It's the projects at the southeast intersection, southeast corner of the intersection of Macaulay and Central. It's zoned a form-based code zone, UCX5. Liquor stores are listed as permitted use with the special exceptions in that zone. It's zoned a form-based code zone, as mentioned, so the distance prohibition does not apply. And CDOT and LDO did not have any concerns or comments that they wouldn't address through the normal permitting procedures.
Okay. And this process is here to allow anyone that has any objections or an opportunity to speak that might be involved in this particular process. If there's not any objections, then that needs to be reflected on the record at this point.
All right. Thank you, sir. Any questions or comments on the special exceptions permit in District 8? Please hit your light. Seeing none. Karen, do you have 011? Oh, Councilwoman, I see you. You gotta be fast around here.
I'm sorry.
Councilwoman,
This is on the corner of Macaulay and Central.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so yeah, there is some opposition on that. Okay.
thank you.
When will they be able to appear? Will they be this evening or?
This evening.
This evening? Okay, so we need to have some discussion of that this evening.
Make a note of that. Okay.
I think I've got one more here. Let me come back to that. I think I've got one more though.
Councilwoman, if you don't mind, we're going to kind of move in the order of the agenda, and if there's an item in your district, we will be happy to cover it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome, thank you. Karen, do you have 0116 on deck for your
I
first?
do.
Very good. Let's go ahead and run through that, because this is in District 1, this is a deferred case, and I know that this had plenty of opposition.
It did. It was been deferred several times. And this is a request to rezone Old Pineville Road from R1 to R3 to build apartments. It's part of a larger development proposed along Old Pineville Road. The property is currently zoned R1. The rezoning's only for 1.5 acres. It's the area highlighted in red. The rest of it's part of a proposed development. The rest of it's shown in the brown, kind of following Old Pineville Road on the western side. The property was rezoned, the rest of the property was rezoned in 1979. So this site plan is just showing the yellow. So again, going back, the R1 property highlighted in red, this is just showing the same area. So you can see the existing R3 zone property with the apartments proposed for that, and then this being that 1.5 acres that they would like to rezone to extend the apartment complex. The surrounding development form consists of kind of a suburban residential pattern with on-site parking. There's a multi-unit residential apartment complex there to the west. There's a topography difference that's higher than the surrounding property. And there's a range of 170 to 280 units in that apartment complex. So again, this is showing the slopes. We're showing these. There was quite a bit of public comment about activity kind of at the top with the apartment complex related to just stormwater, trash coming down from that complex. Staff found that the request is compatible with surrounding land uses, development form, and the zoning in the area. This is an extension of that existing R3 zone, and it's for those just two smaller properties that would be part of a larger zone. There's no adopted land use plan for the area, so staff did not recommend extending any R3 zoning further along Old Pineville, and staff recommended approval. As mentioned, there was quite a bit of discussion about noise, traffic, flooding, and fire access, and the street itself. Planning Commission, I think, just determined there was not, they did not have, could not support the project, and it comes with the Planning Commission recommendation to deny.
Councilman Henderson, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. Karen, I think, was the reason the planning commission denied it, I think, had something to do with fire access, is that correct?
I went back and looked at the video when it first came up, and I believe the comment was something along the lines of, I just don't see that there's support from Planning Commission after all this discussion. I believe the Planning Commission did communicate some additional information with the applicant afterwards, and fire did come up.
Okay. Do we know, I see the chief back there, do we know, so I was told by the applicant, but I want to verify this, that issue has been resolved. Does anybody know if that is the case? Or I guess at some point we need to find out if that somehow has been resolved. I think, understood he was going to be required to widen Delawana. And I don't know if that was the issue with the fire or if there were other issues as well.
I can find the answer in the next few days if we don't have one on hand.
Okay. If we could have that at least by next week.
Yes.
That'd be great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Any other questions or comments on case 0116? Karen, any follow-up?
No, other than we'll provide the information as soon as possible.
Thank you. Do you have 0184 next in your list?
I do. So this is another case that had opposition. We only had 3 cases that had opposition. This is the second of that batch. It's a request to rezone Hickory Street and East 28th Street from R1 to O1 to construct a new building for a business that's adjacent to the site. The South Hickory, much of the area to the south and west is manufacturing. That's that purple shaded zone. This is a block on South Hickory that's R1 residential. The property north and east of the site is residential also. The site's surrounded by single families, pretty reflective of the zoning, single unit residential, commercial, warehouse, and industrial uses. The aerial photograph does show 2 remaining houses on the site. Those have been removed, so there are no longer residential structures on the site, and that was part of staff's consideration in the recommendation. The Rossville Boulevard plan recommends low-density residential for the site, but the site is currently vacant with no existing residential units. We had a similar a similar consideration in a zoning case about a year ago, where we had a recommendation when the block was built out, but those have been removed over time, so staff put that into the recommendation. Staff felt that the proposed use and zone would serve as a buffer between those existing residential units and the industrial shown on the map. And staff recommended adding a buffer against the alley between the site and the existing residents. So there is a alley which will provide some buffer, but then an additional buffer between the office zone and the residential zone to the east. There was opposition present at Planning Commission, concerns about stormwater and flooding. If they come, they can speak to that. It sounded as if the changes when the homes were torn down might have triggered some additional flooding, stormwater issues. Planning Commission found that while the proposal is not compatible with the plan, similar to staff, it could serve as a buffer between the uses with a condition that it's that 10-foot landscape buffer be added.
Very good. Madam Chair.
Yes, Karen, so for this one, did you say it was in line or not in line with the Rossville Boulevard?
It's
the
not
current
in line
plan?
with the plan, but based on kind of our thinking on a prior case that had a similar situation, the plan was developed when there were homes on that site. And usually the plans don't envision tearing down properties or removing those homes. Those properties are no longer here when we had the zoning case. So we said, okay, kind of thinking about that now, having a large manufacturing area, it seems to make sense to have a small, I think that's a 5,000 square foot office building. The O1 zone is pretty contained. It's not a very common zone. It pretty much only allows offices and single family homes. So we felt that that would be a relatively low impact transition between those higher intensity uses and the remaining single family.
Okay, and because we are in desperate need of density in that Rossville, East Lake area, and I haven't heard anything from this developer or the applicant, I would ask the applicant to reach out in regards to this one, because again, that area needs a lot of density, so we can get some of the amenities we would like, and to not hear from an applicant regarding this, and it's already R1.
I will follow up with the applicant,
Yeah, so
yes.
just have them reach out to me so we can discuss this, but I believe it shows up next week, and it'll more than likely be deferred.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Karen, let's move to 0183.
This is a rezoning from C2 to UGC on Dotson Avenue. We didn't have anyone come to Planning Commission in opposition, but we did receive an email from a neighboring property owner. The request is to rezone, the slide shows commercial strip center, but the application stated to allow for a greater variety of businesses on the site, including potential alcohol sales. The site zone C2 commercial, as is much of that section of the Dotson Avenue corridor, kind of the older pattern of the strip commercial zoning with residential immediately abutting that. The development form is kind of small-scale commercial development on Dotson. There's a church or two in the area and a variety of housing types surrounding that commercial core. The River to Ridge plan recommends a mixed residential place type, which is really supporting a wide range of residential housing. The plan does have a secondary use criteria, which starts to introduce a mix of uses if it's in location specific. So secondary uses include, among other things, neighborhoods serving businesses. And because this is located on a primary street and a corner and close to transit, it does kind of qualify for those secondary use mix. So staff found that the UGC zone would be compatible with surrounding land uses and development form, and it introduces that desired urban development form. That UGC is our urban commercial corridor zone right now. So with the idea that that is something that's the development pattern supported by the plan. There was no opposition. The email did have concerns about alcohol-related concerns. Staff recommended approval. Planning Commission had similar findings in staff that this is an appropriate location for the UGC zone with a condition. This is a condition we've used elsewhere. Auto-oriented uses, adult-oriented establishments, self-service storage facilities, wholesaling with accessory warehousing and hospitals shall be prohibited. Those are just some higher activity generating that are not always in line with the plan recommendations.
Very good. Councilwoman Knoll, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have not spoke with anyone in reference to this at all. The neighborhood association president has not contacted me as well, so I'm going to need to have a conversation.
Okay. I will contact the person, also share the information and the email. We have received an opposition.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Karen, can I take a point of privilege real quick? Do we have a big enough sign at the Regional Planning Agency that says, please reach out to the council representative before you apply?
We do, and we stress and we stress. And often I come back from these meetings and say, again, I can't stress enough how important it is to tell applicants.
Okay, could
So
we maybe
will-
light it or something,
We
flashing?
might do something more with more pizzazz for 2024, yes.
Okay, because I feel like we're missing something
Yes,
here.
and we do try to confirm, we do try to tell them that if you do not contact your council person, it could lead to delay in additional timeframes. So
Yeah.
we will reinforce that.
I think that would be awesome. Thank you so much. Councilwoman, did you need another?
If I may go back to E, if you're finished with your agenda in the order that you're going. Or do
Yes,
you
ma'am,
want me
please,
to?
yes. Karen,
Okay.
can we pull up 0179?
Thank you. So once again, I mean, you don't really have to give me I have not spoke with the individuals in reference to E as well as G.
I will contact the applicant.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I've made a few
Thank
notes
you.
as well on my end. Thank you. Counselor, are there any other cases without opposition you would like for us to cover this afternoon? If not, I'm going to ask for Mr. Anderson, if you'll join us. I believe you have something you'd like to present.
Ms. Rennick is going to do the first half, and I'm going to do the second half. She's going to do the hard half.
I would expect nothing less. All right.
Okay, this is not, the City of Chattanooga ordinance is not on an agenda until well into 2024, but wanted to give you an update on where we are. We do have a public draft of the zoning ordinance, comes to you from Planning Commission with a recommendation to approve. And again, this is on a future council agenda. This is a quote from Mayor Kelly, but I just wanted to highlight, I think, that this is important because it gives us a modern zoning code for the 21st century. I think our original the zoning code we're using now hasn't really had an overhaul since perhaps the 1960s, or a major overhaul. So just a general overview, this is really kind of a nuts and bolts of the zoning ordinance. It's a complete overhaul of the Chapter 38, the zoning ordinance. It aligns with state law. We are given the ability to do zoning under state law, and it does align with those laws. It's a step forward for the city, provides greater housing availability and economic growth. And it provides for a wider range of housing types and a housing mix, which is something we have sorely needed, and particularly in our urban area. And just to provide it does not amend the form-based code, the downtown code. The downtown code is also just zoning, but this update does not provide a focus on the downtown code and does not amend it. So the goals for the zoning ordinance update were set at the beginning, and we've really kind of pointed to them along the way. This is why we're doing what we're doing. To highlight just a few, I think the main one is to implement the One Chattanooga strategic plan, particularly regarding housing choices. We want to equitably support all residents, support urban development patterns, implement zoning that supports transit services, and just remove outdated language, update definitions, and accommodate emerging uses. A lot of times we do that kind of on the fly as something comes up. This is intended to be forward-thinking and really reduce the need for zoning ordinance amendments, variances, and conditions, and you'll see that one way we're doing that a little bit later. So This points us back with a 2020 start date, which might be a little early, but the precursor to drafting the code we have now was a zoning code assessment. We kicked that off in September 2020 to really get a feel for what an overhaul of a zoning code would look like. That was finished and completed in December 2021 and really started to help outline the goals of the update and kind of the amount of lift it would need to get a new zoning code. For the past 15 months, we've been working with the consultant firm Camiros. We have an initial draft, a staff review draft, and a public draft. That final public draft is the one that is currently posted. The Planning Commission in November at last month's meeting, we had a work session the month prior. Last month, they recommended adoption of the zoning ordinance. There was some discussion about some additional tasks that would need to be done, including public engagement, and Chris will speak to that. So it would be remiss if I didn't mention the work of all the other departments in the city. We did a lot of consultation. A lot of these folks are subject matter experts, a lot of help, a lot of review time. So just wanted to provide thanks to the departments seen here. And just some highlights of change. This is really kind of 4 big buckets. New residential zones to allow a more urban form and mix of uses. I've mentioned that, but it's probably can't stress that enough. We really have a need for this. Commercial mixed use zones, they have standards, and we're seeking to address those development impacts that we have dealt with through use of conditions. So different ways to get away from that and provide a little bit more nuance in our code than treating everything the same. Industrial zones don't have a lot of variation from what we have now, but there is a new zone that is seeking to use older industrial structures, but adding in a mix of uses. Right now, we keep them pretty separate. This is the reuse of existing structures that really kind of give us a sense of place. And then we have some new special purpose zones, still have an urban agriculture zone, institutional uses and open spaces. These are different ways of treating some of the things we do now. Open spaces is a new zone with the idea that public facilities would have a zone of its own. And I'll turn over to Chris, and then we're available for questions at the end.
And council, if you have any questions for Karen, if you'll hit your light before Chris makes his presentation. Chris, I see we're all clear. Wait a minute, hang on, Madam Vice Chair.
So, as I've been thinking through this, this new zoning code, I'm holding several things in my mind all at once, trying to make them all the number one priority, which is obviously impossible. I am concerned about making sure that the innovations that we open up in the code allow for more small missing middle type development. And so that's something I'm going to be looking at really closely and ensuring that we've got the right amount of land mass required, that we have the right amount of parking, things like that would allow us to have an infill of a 4-plex, for example, or a 3-plex in what currently is an R1 neighborhood. At the same time, something that I've shared with the administration is I'm hyper aware of the loss of our tree canopy and how we do that. So I'm also thinking about, well, how much land can a building actually take up on a lot? And I get that those are difficult to hold in hand. And then you all know how much I care about housing affordability, and obviously density breeds affordability. But if we don't have trees, we don't have oxygen. So those are things that I'm really digging in on is what will this allow us to do? And I actually just saw C&E when I came in. They gave me this cool missing middle book. I think they've got one for everybody that looks at all these different projects. And some of them have been really hard to get through the zoning process and the planning process. And so I'm going to be doing some cross-referencing to make sure that that we are in fact smoothing the way so that other developers can do some of those things. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Chris, if you'll allow me to piggyback real quick before you present. want to remind folks that I think it was March of 2015 is when the Tennessee General Assembly enacted the no more forced annexation. And it was noted earlier that we've been working on a zoning code decades and decades and decades old. Well, when we did that, or when the Tennessee General Assembly enacted that, it means essentially we hit an invisible wall. And how we look at our city's growth was going to change. And when I was campaigning in 2016 for the 2017 spring election, I was telling folks that things are going to have to modify at some point. And here we are, second term, and we're doing it. But there will be some changes. I think how we enact those changes, obviously zoning by the city charter is a city council responsibility. And I appreciate Chris and the mayor's office working with us on a time frame that allows for a lot of time. And we'll get into our time frame here in a minute, Chris. That allows for public input, for stakeholder input, and I think that's extremely important. But to address what the vice chair has said is this has been a long time coming, and action by the state has also moved that time frame up for us, and here we are. But how we do that and do it responsibly, I think is one of our biggest challenges. Chris, with that, I'll let you, I'm sorry. Councilman Coonrod, do you have a comment?
Thank you,
have the
Chair.
mic.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I'm really excited. We ain't even dived into it yet, but just the highlight of the changes, really. Because I'm very passionate about, the missing middle. And here at the last bullet point, to address urban agricultural uses and open spaces, like it's so much that you can do with that to address food insecurities, our community well-being, healing gardens. It's so much that people can do with that, so I'm really excited. And also very excited to what it could do for our Brainerd Road with the mixed use. They can activate those spaces on Brainerd Road, Macaulay Avenue, Glass Street. Is so much opportunity that I see, so I'm ready for Chris to present it.
Thank you, Councilwoman. And you will see as you read this in the details, a lot of the things that you speak very passionately about are reflected in the zoning update. And to Councilwoman Hill's point, after you and I discussed the tree canopy issue, we went back and there's a section on the maximum amount of a lot that a building we went away from the side setbacks because nobody's planting a tree in a side yard typically. So what we did was we went with a 60% maximum building coverage on the lot overall, and that should prevent the tree canopy from going away because you have ample space in the front and the rear to plant.
Thank you. I'll think about that.
So what's in the future? Well, before we get to that, the past, it's been kind of alluded to. Most of our zoning code was written in 1961, so we have mostly a zoning code that reflects the needs of 1961. And it's been certainly amended by myself, by some of the people here today. There have been little amendments over the years by many others, but those amendments have not been holistic. They've been merely to individual sections here and there. It's why we find ourselves in this quandary where UGC seems to be the square peg that we fit in the round hole because we don't have anything better. So this will give us more options for that. And while conditional zoning is not going away, you still have the right to do that. It's our sincere hope that we have given you enough to work with to where conditional zoning is no longer so necessary on as many cases. So this says tentative, but we have confirmed January 10th will be the first public input session where we'll take Q&A from anybody who shows up. That'll be at the Development Resource Center at 5 o'clock on January 10th. As soon as we confirm the availability, I'll confirm that the Family Justice Center at 5:30 the following Wednesday in Midtown will be the second public input session. Council next steps. This is completely within your purview and you can change any one of these dates you want to. This reflects the agreement between Council Chair Dotley and Committee Chair Ledford and myself today, where we kind of worked out the schedule for how this would go for the next few months. Obviously today is the committee hearing. We're not asking for a vote for a long time, nor do we want one because it's still a fluid process and we want to hear from the public and from stakeholders. So the council work session will be January 30th And Chairman, I'm not sure if you've set a time for that yet, but I assume it's going to be earlier in the day.
That's correct. If, we'll talk about that as a council and make sure that we're in agreement on that. But yes, that would be one of the first things we would do.
Great.
Kind of in lieu of the strategic planning session or around that timeframe. What's the thinking?
And administration staff will obviously be on hand to answer any question that you have. And if there's something that comes up in that meeting that we aren't, it's 200 pages. So if we aren't able to answer right in that moment, we will collect all the data and get back to you ASAP after that. We've got some time after it too. So the council public hearing will be held on February 6th, I believe by law in this room. And that will be yet another opportunity for members of the public to come and voice their support, opposition, or questions. And then the adoption schedule is currently set is a first read on February 13 and a final read on February 20. Typically, ordinances and items passed by this council into law take effect 14 days after passage. I need more than 14 days for our team to implement these. What we're going to ask for is a 90-day implementation period. That gives us enough time to change things over at the Department of Planning as well as the Land Development Office and other relevant departments. So 90 days gets that done. The question will be asked, can I go ahead and apply for a rezone with the new zones before they take effect? The answer, unless Phil tells me no, is yes. And the 90-day delay won't matter because honestly, it takes about 6 weeks from application to appearing at the Planning Commission. Add a month and a week for City Council, add another 2 weeks for effect of the zone, and that's 3 months. So even if somebody applied right away, it would be 3 months before a new zone could take effect anyway, if somebody wanted to change to one of the new zones. The implementation. This is the most important part of this presentation. Not a single piece of property is rezoned or changed in any way by passage of this zoning code. I'll say again, not any property is rezoned with passage of this zoning code. This is merely a new toolbox with new shiny tools to replace the old rusty mismatched toolbox that we have now that's been kind of thrown together over the decades. Nothing changes in a single neighborhood. Nothing changes in a commercial thoroughfare. These are merely new zones that they can be rezoned to. This is not a rezone. Plan Chattanooga and area plans are going to guide the mapping of the new zoning districts. So what Plan Chattanooga, Dan and Karen have spoken to you about that some already in previous meetings. This will be a community-driven, council-driven mapping process for all the areas of the city that need to be remapped. I think there will be a little more focus on some commercial corridors that maybe aren't as lively as the others in town and have, a lot of surface parking lots that are being underutilized and that sort of thing. That's where it'll start. I believe East 23rd Street is likely the first area to get a lens over some of the unused properties in that district to see what zones can we recommend and what zones will the property owners want for us to stimulate development on that corridor on currently vacant properties and get more density that is going to help the businesses and help the residents. So the area plans, you know what area plans are. I won't go into that. And we will give recommendations for upzoning or downzoning or rezoning. But again, this is not a forced rezoning of any single property in the city of Chattanooga. This is simply giving more options. Mayor Kelly has decided we will do a quarterly review internally in the first year. We'll review it 4 times to see how it's going. This should be a living, breathing document that we're always looking at. I've never read, written, or seen a perfect piece of legislation, and none of us are ever going to. We have to constantly look at these things for ways to improve it. Situations will arise at future planning commission meetings where we learn there's a special condition with this kind of zone in this part of town, and we need to offer amendments. And I expect that for the first year, we'll offer several of those amendments to this body for consideration. And then after the first year, we will do an annual review among staff and report to council each time. And then, of course, you may amend this code any Tuesday you see fit, as is your right now. That doesn't change. And we'll continue doing public input sessions, and we'll be having a lot of public engagement around this. It's still fluid. We're still making changes. There are a handful of things that from the time the last draft was completed to today, we're already going to recommend some changes to the draft that's linked to this on the website. And there are things like changing the way we give credits for EV parking spaces or bike parking and making that an incentive. Maybe changing the size requirement for A1. We're kind of down in the weeds on some of the changes. We're not recommending any big structural changes to the document that's before you today, but just to show we are still fluid on a lot of the details and still open to a lot of discussion about the entire document. The least changed part of the city will be existing R1 neighborhoods. Nothing happens to existing R1 neighborhoods. There will be reduced lot minimums, but a reduced lot minimum being available doesn't change the size of anyone's existing lot. It doesn't change their entitlements. It doesn't change any conditions that are currently on any property in Chattanooga. It merely is planning for the future for new development going forward. And I think I've talked enough, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have, as is Karen.
So, Mr. Anderson, I do have a couple of questions. First, let me run this by council and kind of, this is why this was unveiled today in committee, this particular timeline. So one of the considerations at Planning Commission that I wanted to make sure is that council had adequate time and that the public and stakeholders had adequate time, and building in those mechanisms that reflect opportunity for input, which is why you see, we talked about this, 2 public input sessions in January, a council work session, not until the end of January. This is not a new document that has been released to us today. Council has had this probably for a month now. Mm-hmm. So we're looking at 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and then almost a 4 to 5 month process if council decides we need more time. And that's totally within our prerogative. You're right. So this is kind of where we're at with the time frame for conversation. And it was I was very strong on this in our Planning Commission work session.
Yes.
That we were going to follow this with as much time as possible for community input, stakeholder input, council input. So I would encourage us to be in contact with the administration on any changes, conditions. I really tried to build in, as we say in zoning, one of the most frequented conditions is a buffer, if you will, for us to have the ability to ask questions and for the public.
Yes.
To digest this as well. I've seen it happen in the past where that has not happened, and I want to ensure that that does not happen here. So, council, I do have 3 lights, and if you have comments about the timeline, let's go ahead and get that kind of worked out here, knowing that we can modify this at any time we wish. But I'll go ahead and go around the horn here. Councilman Henderson, I believe you're up first. I'm sorry. Madam Vice Chair, ladies first, sorry.
I'm the green one. Public input. We've got 2 sessions on the 10th and the 17th.
Yes, ma'am.
This document is 180 plus pages. I love the illustrations in it. The diagrams are helpful. That said, I would like the RPA or the administration to think about how to make a public input session useful for everyone that chooses to attend. Because with this zoning, if you're not well-versed in the language of zoning, all of this could mean nothing to you, right? So I would anticipate that we would probably get a lot of solid feedback from builders, developers, and real estate professionals, because they know what to be looking for, engineers, architects.
And we've done a lot of that already.
Right. And so it's possible we would hear more of that. When what I, as a council person, want to help my district do is really understand what is now and what could be in the future, right? So I wonder, one idea I have for you would be to work with our neighborhood services department to come up with some educational tools of, this is what traditional neighborhood 1 means, this is what your house is R1, this is what your neighbor could do, right, in your neighborhood based on this overlay. Some things that would be very useful that then neighborhood services could offer to all of the neighborhood associations as a presentation, and then go to those neighborhood associations on the timeline that works for them within this period to be able to get some solid feedback. You know, I would like Stewart Heights and Forest Plaza and all of the neighborhood associations in my district to be able to comprehend this in a more a tangible way. So think about that, please.
I will, Madam Vice Chair, and we've talked about going to some neighborhood associations. I mean, we'll be particularly responsive if any one of the 9 of you specifically asks us to go to this association on this day. Just trying to balance, you know, we don't want to de-incentivize coming to the public input sessions because we're going to 90 neighborhood associations. Also, 90 is, you know, a lot.
Well, I don't know that every neighborhood association would request a presentation, but I think if we have spent the time to distill what is a very complicated, complex document into understandable chunks, that will be an excellent exercise that frankly will help everyone.
Sure.
So please think about it.
I'm making notes as you and everybody are talking. We'll go back and figure out what we can do in that regard with neighborhood services and with our wonderful staff at RPA.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Councilman Henderson, you now have the floor, sir.
Thank you. So I had requested that there be no adoption schedule, simply because typically when we run something through committee, the committee chair asks, are we ready to vote on this? And at that time, it's put on the 2-week agenda. To put a schedule up here, to me, is going to make this council, who is in charge of zoning, feel like we've got a timeline we've got to meet. I don't think that's fair. I think it ought to be decided when at least 5 of us say it's ready to go on the agenda to vote on. That's the first thing. The second thing is this 90 days, the effective date is 90 days after adoption. I don't really understand how we're going to have area plans and enough time for Plan Chattanooga to be able to start guiding the mapping. In my opinion, this needs to take effect maybe a year after we adopt it so that Plan Chattanooga can do the work. They know what they have to work with, and then we can start mapping out where appropriate zones need to go. I mean, I see us starting to have to deal with, this council, a new zoning code before we ever have an area plan to look at.
That's interesting.
To decide if it's even appropriate. So I think an effective date needs to be pushed back further, at least maybe till some date that Dan feels like it's appropriate, that they can come up with a area plan to give us some guidance by. And if you can do it in 90 days, God bless you, sir. You're a miracle worker.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you, council, for your patience and your faith in us over the last couple of years. I'm working on this. And I want to say a lot of thanks to Chris and to Karen and a lot of staff that have spent a lot of hours the past few months. The one thing I would say about that specific question is that we have 2 area plans today that have already been adopted, Area 3 and Area 11. We anticipate through this, when this code is adopted, we will be mapping most of the city to its existing zoning. It may change names, it may change other things, but the basic entitlements of an R1 neighborhood will be the same. We will map it the same. The only things that we will be mapping differently in the future is where we intend to change policy from a plan to a new zoning district or something like that. So I think we're going to have to figure out the best way to do that over the coming months. But absolutely, our intention is that we won't change zoning any place where we don't think there's a good reason to change it. But the area plans will absolutely give us that guidance, which y'all will adopt in the coming months. And I use 23rd Street and Area 3 plan as a good example. You know, we started looking at that Area 3 just to come up with some case studies of where we would want to start mapping the new zoning districts. And so, you know, that's one that we just started talking about, 23rd Street, and the area around Montague Park.
So by hearing you say in 90 days you can have recommendations that when we start hearing these new plans?
No, sir. No, I think 90 days, we would be looking at new plans and begin to start talking about areas where the council feels like there should be new policy in the future outside of those two that have already been adopted. But in the short term, Area 3 and Area 11, mostly Area 11's probably got less opportunity, but Area 3 I think is a good place to have some case studies and discussions of how we would implement the zoning in those existing plans.
Well, I think this council needs to have more discussion about the effective date and the adoption date. And obviously, I get it, we can move that however we need to. I just feel like having an arbitrary date up there puts this council under some kind of pressure that I'd just soon that date go away and this council decide when we'd like to see it on the agenda. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman,
Welcome.
I'll
Let me,
clarify that.
Sure. Let me respond to that. So I agree with you, Councilman Henderson. In regards to the date being set by council, so I agree, and that's why this is a tentative schedule. This is a proposal. What I'm hoping does not happen, like it does often in government, is when we don't assign ourselves a task, not a darn thing gets done.
Well, we've got a task.
And I've seen it happen I'm in my second term. I've seen things slip by too many times where we just don't get it done. And we've been accused of it. Governments are accused of it all the time. And trying to assign myself a task or assign some sort of tentative guideline, I think is actually being a little more responsible. And if have a little pressure on us to do our homework, then I think the public deserves us to do our homework. If you're uncomfortable with a public hearing being set this far in advance and the first read and final read, that's okay. We can talk about that. I think what I would ask you is, given that we've had almost a month with this, another month, and then another month, 3 months to digest this, would you be comfortable with setting the council work session? That's a Tuesday, I think is pretty light for us, of actually having that date on the 30th of January. Is that okay with you?
I don't have a problem with
Okay.
any date on here except that adoption schedule.
Okay, so
Well,
maybe.
that effective date, I'm
So
sorry.
maybe we could talk to Madam Chair, and, because obviously that will be her decision with control over the agenda, about leaving that, putting a pin in on the council work session of the 30th at that time, at the end of that particular session, asking if we are ready to schedule the public hearing, which is required by law. And one thing I did not want, and I've seen this happen, and it never works well. We did that with the bid, is where we have a same-day vote or something on the same day of a public hearing. I don't think that's a good way to operate. I think it's bad form. I like to have a week in between. So I want to make sure that we have a week in between the public hearing and a first vote. And if you agree to that, then I think that's where we could land, is the council work session on the 30th. And I think we do need to, though, put ourselves in line with some sort of guidelines to get this work done. And those are my comments reflecting that. Any other comments on the timeline? And I do have a couple of lights that are popping up. Wow, it's round the horn here. Okay. Dr. Burrs, you have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you. Just one suggestion before I make my comments, and that is, I think given the feedback, Mr. Chair, what you might want to do is have one of the items on the council work session be set the schedule. Then you have buy-in from everyone. And I don't know that it'll change that much, but it might raise the energy level on some of that discussion. Chris, I'll tell you what I need. I really believe I want my constituents educated, and I love the idea of the Family Justice Center. What I would like, and this may be a challenge, it's a voluminous document. I read it and was saying, say what? And I may not be the sharpest cog in the wheel, but I thought, what are they talking about? Could we have an executive summary, a bullet point statement? The first one being what you said really well, and that is that this doesn't change anything anybody has now. just maybe 10 bullet points, and this is why I want it. When I blast to my constituents that we're going to have something at the Family Justice Center, I want them to have something attached are the bullet points relative to this, please come, and we want your input. So if we could come up with something like that, I don't mean the full thing, bullet points about the full thing. It's very technical, and I think people just want to be assured. So I would love two things if I could. Some sort of an invitation that you can get to our offices where I can blast it out if the district hearing or whatever the Family Justice Center hearing is. I'd like enough time to blast it, and I would also like those bullet points. And then I can take it from there and say, this is really important that you be there. This is your project. We are listening to you. And I'm not going to put any of this on because people sometimes don't trust government and think, oh, well, it's already going to happen. They don't care what I'm going to say or not. And sometimes they don't trust that this is really a good input session. So I would love that. I'm all for doing this. If it happens that we have a public hearing on the 6th, fine. If it doesn't, if it comes later. So the purpose of a public hearing is to hear from an educated public. And unless they really have had a chance to do these other things, I suggest, then if they're against something, I want to know about it. So if we could do those things, I'll do whatever I can to back what it is you're trying to do.
Thank you, Councilwoman, and I'll say yes. I don't ever tell you no, so I'll say yes to the two items that you asked for. The executive summary, we kind of already have that, and we've been using it. We've briefed a few people on it.
I saw that and
And-
still remember the level of people you write for.
Right, we're going to modify
These aren't
it.
ignorant people. They've got a lot on their mind.
Right.
Including me, so if we could just have some sort of a bullet thing, I think the very first thing being that this isn't going to change anything. I mean, that's really important. There's a lot of misinformation out there.
So we have an existing summary that we plan to modify before the
Good.
public input sessions to be geared towards the general public and not architects and home builders and council members. And and there will be some foundational information about it at the
Good.
top, like we discussed.
Something that I can publish that people will read.
Yes, ma'am. We'll
Take
get that to
time to
you.
read.
We'll get that to you in advance of the public input sessions. We'll use it at the public input sessions, and I'll also get everyone on the council but also invitations to the public input sessions in the form of a graphic that you can post to your social media. You can send out on your email list, whatever you want to do with it. So we really do want a lot of public input on this. So we will do
And I
whatever we
like
can
the
to get it.
idea of using the neighborhood associations. In my district, it works better to bring all the neighborhood associations together. So the Family Justice Center is a good thing for me. So I don't need separate ones particularly, but I would love to use neighborhood services to help publish.
We'll get on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Burrs. Councilwoman Coonrod, you have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you, Chair. Dan, he's already been doing exactly what Vice Chairwoman Hill is asked for. I know at least in my district, they come and present all the time about the different zoning and neighborhood services. They're great at hosting these roundtable discussions where just recently at Avondale, they talked about the area plan, they talked about zoning and what R1 mean, what UGC, all this stuff like they talked about. I'm sure they're not just hosting these events in my district, but I hear when Vice Chairwoman Hill is talking about that they should come out into the communities, into the neighborhoods and provide this tool with our neighborhood services people, but their constituents too. They don't know much about the zoning stuff to get up there and say this is what a R1 zone does and this is what this does. They don't even get paid enough to be doing all that, and also they're limited on their staff. Like I know we want to put all this stuff in the wheelhouse of other departments that have very limited people, and they already trying to engage neighborhoods already. A lot of them, like it may be very active in council District 2, but, you know, it's a lot of people that's not showing up in District 9. We have a lot of older people that don't even have access to transportation, so that's, you know, they're very limited with their options of how they can access the reporting of what we're doing. So we talk about a lot that we're in the 21st century. And, you know, historically, you know, in-person meetings have worked. But we got to be honest, we're in the midst of COVID still, and some people still don't feel safe coming out. We should be able to offer other options outside of just in-person. It could be a Zoom meeting. It could be, you know, that they can tap in and see Google Meets, some offer a daytime, lunch hour time that maybe our seniors will feel comfortable with coming out and talking about. So it's not after 6 o'clock. The Justice Center, Family Justice Center is great and convenient for some, but I know in my neighborhood, if I was dependent on transportation, after 6 o'clock, I don't have a way home. So we got to look at that. It's really not accessible for everybody in Chattanooga. And then too, language access. We have a lot of people now Guatemalans, you know, that don't speak English. So they're a part of our fabric of One Chattanooga, and we should keep that in mind. Like maybe we can get this document translated to their language so they can, you know, be a part of what's happening in our community in the discussion, because they pay a lot of dollars into our city, you know. So I would like for them to be, and if there's any other language in Chattanooga, how they can access it and how we can communicate to them that this is happening in our community, and we want them to be a part of the discussion. But I do think when we talk about area plans, like a couple of my colleagues talked about it, it's a lot of, even when we approve stuff, Chairman, it's like this stuff is sitting on the shelf still, even after we've approved it. Like we have to be moving it forward, like with a framework, as Vice Chairwoman always talk about it. What's the framework that we can start implementing this stuff? Because I think what I hear from my constituents is that's the most frustrating part. They come out and attend these meetings, they give their input, and with the intention like this is really gonna happen, and they get all excited about it. We're finally gonna get that tree we've been championing for the past 12 years, and then, oh well, 20 years done passed. The tree's still not planted, you know what I mean? There's no economic development happening in this place that we sparked. So I think I know that's part of their frustration. It's not that they don't understand the plan, they understand it. But they get frustrated that it's not being implemented and done. But I do think that the zoning, I think it'll be good for our city, because like you said, it's it's old, it's outdated. We're talking about in the 60s, communities done changed clearly since then, right? And for our communities, a lot of communities that have been marginalized and just historically lacked investment, a lot of times it's hindered because of the zoning codes that's in place. So, I mean, I got a different outlook for it, but yeah, again, it takes 5 of us.
Thank you, Councilwoman. And the virtual input session is something interesting. I think we can do that. We hadn't contemplated that, but it's a great idea. Thank you. Let me get with our team and make sure there's no impediment to that, but I think it's a wonderful idea. So we'll probably do one of those in January, and I'll get back with this council and let you know when and where that is, or when and what time that is. It'll be everywhere. As far as the Spanish version, that's no problem. We can get getting the entire code translated to Spanish is not going to happen. We don't do that with our laws yet at this time, but with the executive summary and all of the supplementary materials that we produce, absolutely, we can get those in Spanish ahead of the input sessions. We have the ability to do that. And our intention is to move as quickly as we can feasibly while having a good product, because we have an affordable housing crisis today. And the longer we wait, the more that grows. And there are tools in this that will help alleviate that in a lot of the parts of the city that need it the most. I'm hopeful that I will give you enough information to stick to this timetable. If not, it can be changed. But I want to be able to have you in a position where you have all your questions answered, all the public input has been done to your satisfaction. And if we're not doing that, please let me know.
Chris, I have two more lights. Councilman Hester, Councilwoman, are you okay? Thank you so much for your words. Councilman Hester, I see your light, sir.
I think Councilwoman Coonrod mentioned a lot of things I was going to present. I just want to thank Karen and Dan, because the October Neighborhood Roundtable, they did present kind of a sneak preview of this in that roundtable, and collectively, where all the neighborhoods came together, and they did engage in the process too. So thank you, because being foresight and seeing that. So Council Coonrod was there also, so yeah, kudos you guys, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Henderson, I see your light real quick. Again, if I can, on the 30th, you had raised a really good question, Councilman. And for those of you kind of following us and not real sure about the new format, we are in what we call committee meeting right now, where we discuss ideas. It's a little less formal than our business meeting. I know I got an email last week. It's a little confusion between what a committee meeting does and our business meeting. And this is a committee meeting. So whatever is said in here is more of a little bit less formal environment, and we are not voting on anything that's on an agenda this evening. Councilman, you made a good point in the work session. Would 1 o'clock be amenable to everyone on that Tuesday?
The 30th of January.
On the 30th? Okay, Madam Chair, I definitely need your approval. Okay. Madam Clerk, would you please notice a 1 o'clock work session on the 30th? And we'll do that in the conference room where it's even less formal and we can have our notes out in a lot more table space. And then at that time, I think we will definitely discuss setting the schedule, whether we're ready to move on from there. And I appreciate your comments on that, Councilman Henderson. With that being said, sir, you have the light again.
Thank you. Chris, one of the slides was implementation of zoning ordinance, and the first bullet point said property will not be automatically rezoned due to adoption. The second bullet said most zoning of the city will not change following the adoption.
Yes, sir, that second line is a mistake that I took out this morning because the more correct line is the first one, and somehow it didn't get taken out before this draft got sent to council today. I apologize for that.
Okay, because that seemed like a conflict to me.
It sure does. That's why I took it out a few hours ago, because the first line is more correct.
So I just need to just mark through that right there.
Just forget you ever saw it.
Okay, all right.
All right.
Thank you.
Is that on the screen, Chris?
It is, but it's not on the document anymore.
It's not on the document. Pay no attention to dot number 2, please. The second dot.
Because it's not accurate.
It's not accurate, yeah.
No, it's not accurate.
It can't
No
be.
part of no zone changes anywhere in the
It's
city.
not applicable at all, so.
The reason that was couched that way was some of the zoning rules change a little bit, but it doesn't change anyone's lot or anyone's zone. So there was confusion about it, but no, nothing changed. No zone change. I mean, no property changes as a result of this. Zero.
Chris, do you have anything else on this item?
I don't think so, Chairman. I'm just happy to work with you over the next few months.
Well, I'm excited. Thank you all.
Meeting
This was good feedback. This is what we needed to accomplish today on setting forth the schedule. This is a big lift, and it's about time, and we're at a point in history where we're in charge of accomplishing this. So I want to make sure that we take it on with the utmost urgency, but also the diligence that it deserves. Any questions or comments further for any cases in planning and zoning for this afternoon? We do have an attorney-client, so we'll need to recess, Madam Chair. What time would you like for us? I understand we're going to need 15 to 20, 5:15. I'm just throwing a number out. We will recess till 5:15. Thank you, everyone.